Welcome to Corinne's Picks. I'm your host, Corinne Basabe. Today we are delighted to have a guest that we've interviewed before, and we've brought him back, Theo Coulombe.
How you doing?
Thank you for coming back. I enjoyed our last talk. I enjoyed seeing your images, and I just begged you to come back and let's look at some more and talk some more.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to be back here. It's really nice to be
So I
back.
want to rewind a little bit in case anyone hasn't seen the first
Okay.
episode.
All right.
I think what you're doing is really unique because the way you create your photography is quite unique.
Well, it's traditional in terms of the history of photography, but my approach is more like I have to let the mistakes happen because I make a lot of mistakes. So you got to go with the flow rather than trying to make something that's absolutely perfect. You make something that you allow yourself to make rather than trying to make something that is above and beyond. Photography is a very technical thing, as you know, and when you are in that world, there's a lot of specifics that have to happen, and some people are absolute perfectionists about it, and there's many artists in the photography world that are absolute perfectionists. I am not in that group, partially because I'm dyslexic, so I get things backwards, but which leads to some errors. But in the past, when I was much younger, those errors would have been unacceptable to me, and I would have said, "Oh, there's a scratch on the film, no good. Oh, I don't like that composition, no good. I don't like the framing, no good, blah, 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 blah." And now I see what I want, I take the photograph, and I take whatever comes back to me. And I shoot film, and I shoot 8x10 film, which is a large format film, and I shoot in color. So I'm already throwing all the curveballs at myself because all those things require much more discipline than shooting 35 millimeter film, or even less discipline is digital, because you can make up for so many mistakes in the realm of digital photography. So it's kind of, for me, it's a contemplative exercise. I go out. The purest form of it for me is going out and taking the photograph. I go out very early in the morning. I make the photograph, but within that process, I'm making those mistakes that I have to accept that I made.
So okay, I want to show the audience the first image only because to understand how difficult it was to get those shots.
Okay.
And to understand what we're talking about. So can I see the first image, and then we're going to go back to the mechanics of what you do.
Oh yeah, this is a detail shot of a larger image that's in the grouping. So what's happening here is part of what I go for, and in the realm of 8x10 photography or 11x14 photography, as opposed to 35 millimeter photography. A 35 millimeter frame fits into an 8x10 frame 62 times. So when we talk about 35 millimeter photography, you can get a lot of detail and a lot of subtlety in 35 millimeter, but if you times that by 62, you're all of a sudden or if you have 62 of those frames put together, that increases exponentially. All of a sudden, everything's very sharp. The tonalities are very smooth. The color is very saturated or unsaturated. And things like fog, which is the one element I tend to gravitate toward the most in my photography, becomes a very ethereal kind of liminal space that I can kind of put my mind into, because it's, for me, that kind of space and that kind of photography is the diffusion of my thoughts. Like, it's part of the dyslexia, it's part of being learning disabled and stuff. You can't focus on one thing. But then in this extreme foreground, like you see in this image, you see all the plant life, and if you saw that printed 20 feet wide, you would see no lack of resolution. Everything would be absolutely sharp and crystal clear, or out of focus too. So there are areas that have a lack of focus and areas that have intense focus. And the details that you see, like insects or drips of water or the fuzziness or the out of focus areas, that all to me represents the way we see anyway, because when you're looking at any one thing, looking at a person or an object, your peripheral vision tends to become fuzzy or out of focus. And so when I think about the subject matter that I photograph, that is kind of the perfect subject in terms of like extreme foreground elements that are in the frame that should be in extreme focus or slightly out of focus, where things become unsure, where you're kind of looking.
You know, it's really interesting because when you were here last, I think that you were working a lot more with the mist and fog, and I remember thinking that your images they almost looked like paintings. They were very painterly.
Yeah.
And this is quite a different series because I don't recall having, objects with such sharp definition with the fog in the foreground. The subject was it seemed like the subject was the mist or the fog.
That's true.
In the other series.
That was 2 years ago. We're thinking that was 2 years ago. So there was more just about the fog and just a general landscape, and the fog would just be enveloping the entire frame. There would be almost no points of reference on toward the periphery of the images when you look at the edge of the frame. And yet there recently, over the past year, I've been very attracted to putting these like foreground objects, like mostly plant life, because that's what I have where I live. And that being an intense focus, maybe it's kind of like a reflection of how I'm changing about the way I'm thinking over the past few years about how I view myself and how I'm viewing my world. Parts of my world are coming more into focus than they were 2 years ago when things were less in focus. I was not able to like concentrate my emotional energy into being something that was absolutely in focus, like some photographers do, where everything is absolutely perfect and everything is absolutely in focus. That's a realm of photography that if I tried to participate in, I'd be constantly banging my head against the wall, being frustrated by not being able to get it perfect all the time. So yeah, maybe that's part of my refocusing my energies.
It's really interesting what you said. Is like how, as artists, we're almost documenting our own lives.
It's our own emotional landscape all the time.
State of consciousness.
That's what I like. Yeah, some of us, eat our emotions. I photograph my emotions, maybe. I also eat my emotions. I love to cook. And that's one of my photography teachers long, long ago said, if you're going to be a good photographer, you have to be a good cook. So I dutifully started to learn how to cook after that, from that point on.
You have put some things on Instagram that made me just want to jump in my phone. Delicious breakfasts that you photograph. I mean, you're really fancy.
I do get
You're
kind of
very fancy.
Yes. Yeah. I think our cat sitter was raiding our refrigerator while I've been sitting here right now, because I did get photographs from the inside of the refrigerator saying, "What's this? What's this?" We're like, "Eat it," But my wife loves to cook. I love to cook. We share the kitchen, which I think is a big deal. It's a big deal for me because, unlike photography, I have control in the kitchen. A certain amount of control.
Right.
And I'd been a bachelor for a while, so it was very interesting to be able to like let somebody come in and cook and not say anything, just walk away, or like let them do their thing, or just encourage them to do what they're doing, because they're encouraging me as well.
So I'm really puzzled about, in the beginning we talked about, you saying large format and and how you're taking these images. I feel so confused. I thought you were using that old-fashioned method where you put the glass in and you had to cover
It's one
with a
step.
cloth.
It's one step newer than that. So if you glass plates, which is they used to use that and then put them in the camera. I have the big camera. I have the cloth, but instead of glass plates, we use a plastic-based film which is flexible. So they used to use glass because that was the only thing they had back then to put the emulsion on to expose in the camera, and back, I think in probably the 1920s and 30s, they started switching from glass to plastic base, which was flexible, and it was more, it was, they could make more of it cheaply rather than using glass, which was more expensive and more fragile. The plastic was less fragile. So before the 1920s, 1930s, I don't quite remember when it came in, but before then, they used glass. Before they used glass, they used metal plates that they would fix silver to and stuff. But back in the 20s and 30s, they switched from glass to plastic, and I use plastic film, which is the standard film base now. So 35 millimeters plastic based film. When I say base, that means just the structure that the emulsion is put on that makes the photograph.
Yeah,
So
I just don't want people to think that you're getting a digital camera and going, juke. I want people to know how physically demanding it is for you to create each shot.
the camera is heavy.
Yeah.
It needs to be carried around. In the case of myself in the countryside, I wander far and wide so I drive. And it's the camera itself is in a large Pelican case, and there's a large tripod. You cannot handhold this camera. It has to be on a tripod. The exposures start at about 1 second and go as long as 9 seconds. The film is color. The ASAs vary. We have Kodak makes various ASA films, so does Fuji, different companies. But it really comes down to every photographer has their own favorite film. But when it comes to 8x10 photography, you have to build the camera every time you take the photograph. Literally have to build the camera.
Does it have a power source?
Nope. It's all absolutely manual.
Wow.
The lens is on a wooden board that goes on the front of the camera. The camera folds up like a suitcase and has a handle on it, so you can carry it around. And you put it on a tripod, and you open it up, and you lock it down, and you bring up the front standard. And it's really kind of metaphorical, too, because the front standard of the camera controls your plane of focus, so you can tilt and shift. Filmmakers would be familiar with those terms, tilting and shifting. And then the back standard, which is the film plane and the focal plane, that can tilt and shift too, but that's in charge of perspective. So you can change the perspective of a building by going like, tilting back will open up the top so you can get parallel lines going up and down if you're photographing up at something. Because when you use a camera and you point up or you point down, you're changing the perspective. We were just talking about that with this table right here, changing the perspective of what you're looking at. And it looks like if we put a teeny miniature salt shaker here, you'd think this was the longest table in the world. But if we had the 8x10 camera there, we could use the back of the camera to change that perspective and make this seem closer than it actually is.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's perfect for me because it's like the inside of the eye. So when you put the dark cloth over your head, the image is actually backwards and upside down. And for me, being dyslexic, it is so easy for me to look at it and look at the frame and look around the edges of the frame and start putting things where I think they should be. So it's exciting.
Powerful thought that through just making the image corrects your dyslexia.
Yeah, it corrects my dyslexia. I see better through the back of I can see what I want to photograph, but once I have the camera set up and the right lens on it, and there are various lenses that I can put on it, but I have two combinations of things that I do to make the image more impactful by compressing space. Because in photography, you can either widen the space or you can compress the space. So I like to compress my spaces because I'm usually shooting into the distance. So I like to draw what's way back in the background closer to the camera by the combination of the lens and the camera itself.
Wow. So we're going to go to break, and then we're going to come back and dive very intensely
into the images?
Into each image, because we only have, I want to make sure we get through all 7.
All right.
So we'll be back in a sec. Welcome back to Corinne's Picks. I'm your host, Corinne Basabe. We've been talking to the wonderful photographer, Theo Coulombe,
Yep.
and we've been talking mostly about the mechanics of his art, but I think we need to dive deeply into your images. So if we could have the next image, and perhaps you can
Have at
explain
it. Yeah.
the composition and your decision making. Wow.
Yes. This, I believe the title of this one is Looking East from West Cornwall Road, Sharon, Connecticut, 2024. All the titles for the pieces that I do are all very specific titles that are just absolutely descriptive of where the place is, rather than just saying untitled or something like that, which is what a lot of people will do. I have titles on mine. I'm not sure if it limits their accessibility for some people, but after the title, to me, it's irrelevant where the place is. I just like to have a geographical location. But it's just the body of water. I made a video with this too, because I've been diving into video. So I had a video camera going at the same time with sound, because there were hundreds of swallows flying around in circles all over the place. And the quietness of the scene is just the way you see it. Of course, cars come cruising by quite frequently, but you wouldn't know that when you're looking
But how
at them.
close were you? How close were you and your camera to that? I guess.
I was like literally 3 feet from the water's edge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And when I see the scene, I get set up. I set up as quickly as possible, because fog moves and things change quickly. And I've been disappointed many times by getting all set up and getting all ready, and then all of a sudden the scene is gone. And I have to just turn around and say, oh, well. And I'll make videos about these experiences that I post on my Instagram page and also on my website. But it's an interesting experience to be able to go get to that point of realizing what the image is going to be, and then it just disappears, and you're done. I can't wait. There's not going to be any more fog. It's time to pack up and go home.
Why did you decide to shoot these areas This is Connecticut, right?
Yeah, this is in
Okay.
Connecticut. It's the northwest corner of Connecticut. I used to work in the Park Service as a park ranger, and I know that. Yep, and I I worked in Maine. It's the state where my mother and father are from. I went there when I was quite young. I was hired to work on the Appalachian Trail, and that turned into a 5-year job where I would work seasonally up in Maine, and then off season I would be building houses in New Haven and Bridgeport and places like that in Connecticut. And then after I was done with art school, I moved to Brooklyn, and I was there for 23 years. And then when I could no longer stay in Brooklyn, I moved up to the northwest corner of Connecticut, which is actually where the foothills of the Berkshire Mountains come down, or they are the Berkshire Mountains. And it gets quite intricate in its layout and topography, where there's a lot of tight little valleys and these beautiful, very intense mountains that are, it's just a beautiful, beautiful area. I'd say it's probably the more beautiful area of New England when it comes down to it. And that's probably saying a lot, but I like it. And moving west from the northwest corner of Connecticut, you get right into New York State. I could roll down the hill from where I live and be in New York State. It's right down the street.
There's a lot to take.
Yeah.
It's a lot of images you could have chose, but you're choosing very tranquil, still. I mean, there's trees, there's walls, there's old ruins.
Yeah.
But you're.
Oh yeah,
you're
I could photograph barns till the cows come home. And speaking of that, I could photograph cows until the cows come home.
I haven't seen those.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
have done it, but it's something that is not as appealing to me as photographing just these spaces that are so constantly changing that in 10 years from now, that space will look absolutely different, and it will be a different place. Speaking of houses, I photographed old worker housing in Sharon that belonged to an old farm, and they were same exact house built 4 times in the middle of nowhere, all right next to each other, and farm laborers still live there.
Huh.
And I photographed those. When I first moved up there, I photographed them, and there was this gigantic maple tree in front of the four of them. And the next week I went back, and the tree was gone. They'd cut it down. And the landscape just keeps changing. You think things don't change. And now that I've been there for 7 years, and I've been there now officially for 7 years since this past September, the landscape is constantly changing, and it's kind of weird. I make jokes about how I'm a villain. I kind of gentrified Brooklyn by moving there in '93, and now I'm up in Sharon, Connecticut, and I make jokes about, hey, I'm here to gentrify you guys, so look out. And I'm there, but I drive all around early in the morning, and I find the places that I want to go back to, and I keep going back to those places. And I could go back for a year, 2 years, and then, like in the case of this is Herrick Road, and there are two views. There's a left view and a right view on Herrick Road, and they're literally across the street from each other. Hopefully the other one might be next to it, next in the queue. But I literally drove down this road, and I'd driven down it only like 4 times before, and I saw this view, and it's 6:30 in the morning. It's absolutely quiet. There's a gentle wind. And that's another thing, because my exposure is along, anything that moves becomes out of focus, and anything that stays still is absolutely in focus. Another thing I love. And so I did 2 views from Herrick Road, so it's a diptych. And the largest one I've printed so far there you go. That's it. Thank you, guys. So that's the 2 views from Herrick Road. And they're right across the street from each other, photographed right at the same time. And the one on the right is looking toward the east, and that's why the sky is a little bit more, it's a little bit warmer, because the sun is kind of trying to burn through that fog.
These paintings, these photographs,
You can say paintings, it's okay.
Freudian slip. I said paintings, but they're so exquisite, they're so beautiful.
Thank you.
And I mean, these are like paintings, basically.
I like, people make that comment, and it gives me nothing but joy to hear, because they literally, you could break up parts of these photographs and print them as is, and they would come up as paintings. Yeah. And it's just that it's a combination of the color and the way the print comes out. And I print only on matte paper, so there's no glossiness, there's no hardness to it. You see the ink settling into the paper, because I'm using an inkjet printer, which some people call glacis, some people call pigment print, and exactly. And it's all the level of pretense you want to be on about that kind of technology. But it is a giant fancy inkjet printer. It prints 44 inches wide, and I can print what I need to see. It's probably the only positive note I got out of COVID was getting a small business loan for my art gallery, and being able to buy this from B&H, this big printer, for very little money at the time, which was
we haven't mentioned that you own, Theo Coulombe owns a gallery in Connecticut, Standard Space.
Yep.
And are people getting your prints of this work online or in your gallery?
Some people, they look online and then they come to the gallery to look at the prints, because they want to see the prints. But the gallery is contemporary art that we show. Currently we have Danielle Tegeter, excuse me, Danielle, who is a tenured professor here at Lehman.
Yay, Lehman.
She's here at Lehman, and she's amazing. She does these beautifully mechanical paintings on linen, in this case, the work that's up now. And we've shown a lot of different artists from all over the United States, and some local artists as well from the area. The painter Jasper Johns lives right over the hill from me, and then the painter Philip Taft lives in West Cornwall, and I get to interact with these people. I opened the gallery so that I would have something to do up there, and that put me into the position of being able to be in a dialogue with other artists in the area.
That's
so
perfect.
Yeah, it is perfect.
So let's see the next image. I'm striving to see.
We're trying to get through all of them. I think we're doing pretty good. This is looking through. This is entitled Looking Over Harlem Valley Toward Wassaic Train Station. And it's, again, early in the morning, it's looking west, and the sun is just coming in and just starting to burn off the fog. And if you see the print in person, there's going to be a little gold sunlight right on the top of the hill that's way in the back there in the fog. And also touching the tips of those trees way in the back in the fog. But in the extreme foreground, you have all this common mugwort and bittersweet vines and different types of vegetation. And there was a slight breeze blowing, and some of them are absolutely still and absolutely detailed, and some of them are moving. So you have this constant kind of sense of movement.
So Theo, once again, we've run out of time.
We have.
We have, and you know, these conversations, your art is so remarkable. I can talk about it forever. And
thank you.
They make my heart like just burst. It's so beautiful.
Well, you like the countryside, don't you?
I do,
Yes.
I do. We do. Okay, so we'll thank you for coming again, and hopefully we'll have you back in Corinne's
Thank you,
Picks.
Corinne. I really appreciate it.